I am writing this so I don't forget the order of things and so someone else can recognize the signs if they ever find the same ground. My name is Clara Redmond. I grew up in Salem, Oregon. My older sister Nora disappeared on a hiking trip when I was 14. She was 20. Her last text was a photo of the Wilson River near a bend below a rock outcrop off Highway 6, somewhere between the Jones Creek and Koenig Creek trailheads. After that, nothing. Every September I come back to Tillamook State Forest. I tell people it's for closure, but it's closer to inventory. I walk the trails, check the pullouts, read the bulletin boards, and pay attention to anything that wasn't there before. The forest has a public record if you know what to look for. Reforestation signs about the Tillamook burn. School children who planted seedlings in the 1950s. The opening of the Tillamook Forest Center in 2006. Trail mileage markers that don't move but wear down from boots. I thought history would make me feel less lost. This year, my friends asked me not to spend Nora's 30th birthday alone. I agreed because I didn't want to make the same circle by myself again. We camped just off the Wilson River Trail, a few miles west of the Jones Creek Day use area. We weren't far from the water. You could hear it moving in the dark. The group was Matt, who makes a joke out of anything first and deals with feelings second. Dana, a medical student who carries more first aid gear than some small clinics. Cole, quiet and reliable. And Luis, who brought a guitar and a small bag of weed he swore was for sleep. I planned the walk, made sure we were outside the riparian zones, and picked a flat spot that didn't show recent use. We cooked shrimp and rice on a camp stove, and talked about old music and how many times we'd all promised to quit our jobs. I tried to keep the conversation on neutral ground and away from Nora. I failed. People who love you will always steer back to the thing you avoid. Just after midnight, the coyotes moved close. Most of the time they stay in the cut blocks or across the river. That night they came up the slope, yipping in short bursts. We heard one weighty movement in the brush, and then nothing. I told myself it was deer. The air felt heavy. It is hard to define this without sounding like superstition. What I can say is that we kept stopping mid-sentence to listen. The river stayed steady. The wind through the firs sounded normal, and then it didn't, like a hand pressed down on the whole scene. We killed the fire to keep the smoke from sinking under the canopy. Everyone went to tents. I lay awake on my pad with my headlamp off, counting breaths, and thinking about the odds that Nora had picked this trail the day she vanished. I wasn't crying. I was waiting for the feeling to pass. The sound under my tent started like sand shifting in a bottle. I told myself it was root movement or a vole. It was not. It turned into a steady scrubbing noise against the underside of the floor. I sat up and placed my palm flat. There was something pressing back. The next push bowed the nylon. I rolled off the pad and unzipped as fast as the teeth would allow and shouted for Matt. By the time he got to me, the tent floor creased inward like someone had reached up from below and made a fist. Dana had her headlamp on my hands as I pulled stakes. Cole brought the camp shovel. When the last stake came free, the body under the floor shifted again. We grabbed the corners and dragged the whole thing aside. The soil below was loose and dark, almost black. Matt knelt and started digging with both hands. He hit Knuckles first. The hand was small and slick with mud. He said he had it, and then we all had it, and then a forearm, and then a shoulder. There was a woman buried there, face turned to the side in a pocket of air. When I cleared her mouth, the first thing she did was try to scream, but no sound came. She took a breath that sounded painful and said one sentence, "If they know I'm alive, they'll come back." We got her out. She was light in a way that made me think of fever wards. Mud caked her hair and packed the wrinkles of her ears. Her nails were broken down into raw crescents. The skin along her ribs and hips had a pattern of faint cross-hatched scars, like old rope burns or a lattice that had healed. Dana did the basics: airway, breathing, circulation. The woman was oriented but shocky. She gave her name as Mara and clutched at the ground whenever anyone stood up. Dana wanted to hike her to the highway and flag a car. It would have taken us an hour and a half dry, 2 with someone sick. Mara said no. She said the word no with hard edges and shook her head so violently she almost fainted. "They will know," she said. I asked who. She looked toward the trees and said nothing. We wrapped her in a space blanket and my coat. I held a bottle cap of water to her lips and watched her swallow the way you watch a newborn, counting each motion like it might stop. We were careful. We put the fire out cold and moved our food. We checked for tracks and didn't find any new ones except ours. That should have made me feel better. It did not. The fire ring was old rock, but the ash inside wasn't fully gray. Someone had burned here very recently and raked it smooth. The line where you expect to see boot edges had been brushed, as if someone had used a leafy branch to erase the boundary. Our food bags didn't hang where we left them. They were cut down and slashed. Not torn, cut. The bananas and apples were still there, oddly left in the dirt. The protein bars were missing. I saw a loop of rope tossed over a low limb 20 yards from our tents. At first I thought it was old line for a bear hang. It had a small weight on the free end and a simple loop tied at the other. Years of walking woods means you see a lot of forgotten gear. This wasn't that. 5 more hung within sight all the same, all with the same quick tie. No wind moved them. That detail stuck with me because even on still nights there is always some movement. I thought I was prepared for anything tied to my sister. I wasn't prepared for the fragment of fabric I found caught in Mara's torn shirt. The stitch pattern matched a coat Nora wore the winter before she disappeared. My mother had added a repaired patch with that same odd thread color because the original seam wouldn't hold. I told myself hundreds of jackets have similar repairs. Then I felt the thread between my fingers and knew I was lying. I did not tell anyone right away. I stood with it in my hand and tried to breathe until my body would accept the air. We made a plan that satisfied no one. We would wait for first light and move together to the highway with Mara. We would leave the tents and gear if necessary. Rotate watch until dawn. No one leaves the circle of the lights. Luis sat with his guitar case closed and stared at nothing. Cole walked the distance between the river and the tents like an animal pacing. Matt sharpened a stick to give his hands a job. I stayed next to Mara and Dana. Every 15 minutes I checked Mara's pulse. It was faster than it should have been, and steady. She would startle at nothing and scan the same part of the tree line like there was a door there. At 1 in the morning, a single sharp whistle sounded from uphill. It wasn't a bird. The note was too flat, and the diaphragm behind it felt human. 10 seconds later, another whistle answered from below us, closer to the river. 7 seconds after that, a third came from the west. One of the worst parts of that moment is I could hear Matt trying to decide whether to make it into a joke and failing. We stood and faced outward. Lights pointed into trunks and brush and empty spaces that looked like faces because fear makes patterns out of gaps. A minute later, we found Luis's boots placed neatly 50 yards away on the trail, toes pointed toward camp, laces tied. He had been wearing them when we started our watch. Luis came back around 2 with his socks muddy up to the ankle bones. He said he had gone to pee and then got turned around. There is a tone people make when they know they have to lie to get back inside a circle. He had that tone. Dana checked his pupils. They were normal. He wouldn't look at Mara. I smelled kerosene on him even before I bent close. He said it was from camp fuel and lifted his hands like that explained why soil was pushed deep under his nails. We put him between Matt and Cole and told him to sleep. No one slept. At first light we found 3 shallow depressions under the moss behind where my tent had been. They were the width of a body and less than 3 feet deep, each with fresh leaves layered on the bottom. Later, I would think they looked like cradles for something adults don't talk about. At the time, I focused on the practical. The soil was damp, but not newly turned. The edges were clean, not clawed out. Beside the 3rd depression, I found a thin line of chain half buried in mud. When I pulled it free, a small charm came with it, the kind of cheap letter charm you buy in a gas station rack. It was a capital N. The backing was rusted so badly it flaked in my fingers. The second I saw it, I knew I was done making bargains with fear. I said we weren't leaving. I said whoever put Mara in the dirt did it in a place they could return to without being noticed. I said if we didn't follow their path now, we never would. Matt told me I was thinking like a person who needed the story to end a certain way. He wasn't wrong. Dana looked at Mara's wrists, and then at the depressions, and said we had an obligation to do more than run. Mara didn't remember faces. She remembered hands. She remembered being dragged, and then lifted, and then kept still by a board across her hips. She remembered the smell of fuel. She remembered hearing practiced movements above her, not clumsy or frantic. Like they've done it before, she said. She pointed downhill toward a place where the alder thins and the ground firms up. There, she said. They take you that way. We moved slow and careful without talking. I marked our path with small torn bits of orange tape from my first aid kit whenever we changed direction. We kept Mara in the middle and checked behind us more than ahead. About half a mile from camp, the ground leveled into a flat with older stumps and younger growth. In the center of the flat sat an arrangement of timbers that at first looked like salvage from an old bridge. When we got closer, we saw they were lids. Rough-cut boards nailed across shallow pits. Some had stones stacked on them. A few had been staked through with rebar. The pits were long enough for bodies, short enough that you'd have to bend your knees. I put my ear to the nearest board and heard nothing, then to the next and heard a scrape from below. Not a voice, not knocking, the steady scratch of nails on wood. It is important to be honest here. We did not turn into heroes. We did not pry up lids and carry strangers out in our arms like a news story. Matt stepped back until he hit Cole. Dana reached for the rebar and then took her hand away. Mara wrapped her arms around her torso like she was trying to hold herself closed. I looked at all the boards at once and felt my mind stretch thin. The whistle came again, this time from the trees to our left, very close. 5 shapes moved out of the understory like they had been waiting for the cue. They wore canvas and old jackets patched with cloth I recognized from flea markets and farm sales. Their faces were covered with masks made from burlap and leather scraps, stitched with symbols that meant nothing to me except the time it takes to make them. They carried tools, shovels, a length of rope with a loop already tied, a post hole digger, a pry bar. None of them ran. They just came on like they were walking to work. We backed toward the far edge of the flat. One of the figures cut across to block. 2 more separated to flank us. The person in the center stepped toward Dana and reached for her without hurry. Matt hit that one with the stick he'd sharpened. The sound it made against the shoulder was dull. The person stumbled, then grabbed the stick and pulled it out of his hands so fast I lost track of it. Cole tackled the one on the left, and they went down in brush hard enough to break branches. I dragged Mara toward the far side while Dana tried to pull Matt back. In the middle of it all, I had the stupid thought that we had no idea how many more were in the trees. I don't know where the idea came from, except the smell on Luis's hands. Fuel means fire. We carried a small canister in my pack to start wet wood. I pulled it out and unscrewed the cap and poured a line across the 2 closest lids and then sloshed a trail onto the brush. "Back," I said to Dana. "Back." The lighter took on the 4th flick. When the flame ran across the board, the sound from beneath changed. I will not describe that sound. The 2nd lid took. The flames climbed into dead grass and then into a punky log. Heat pushed the masked people away a few yards. It didn't make them run. It made them turn our way and take us seriously. Fire is a tool and a threat in this forest. The Tillamook burn started in 1933 and burned over and over for almost 20 years. The replanting took decades. There are signs everywhere about it. How quickly heat can ladder into crowns, how fast wind can turn an ember into a line that runs a mile. I knew if I kept feeding the flame we would be building more than a distraction. I also knew it was the only thing that changed the math. The nearest masked person stepped in and swung the pry bar at Matt. The bar hit him across the back and he folded. Cole got to his feet with a mouth full of blood and charged the same person. Dana grabbed one end of the rope and looped it around the person's ankle and yanked. It was clumsy, but it worked. The person hit the ground hard. The mask shifted sideways. and I saw enough of a face to know this wasn't a ghost story. It was a man in his 50s with a white scar across his chin and a missing molar. He looked at me like I had interrupted a job. The fire popped and one of the lids split. The heat washed across our backs. Two masked figures moved to stamp at the flames with wet burlap. I took Mara's hand and pulled her toward the far trees. Dana got Matt under the arms and dragged him. Cole covered. We made it 20 yards before the person with the pry bar got up again and came on with real speed. I turned to throw the empty fuel can and saw the patch on their mask. Brown cloth with a slanted line of blue thread down the center. I knew it from the coat in my mother's hall closet. Nora's jacket patched the winter before she left home. For a second I lost the ability to move. The person with the mask stepped toward me like he recognized that drop in voltage. Cole hit him in the side and they went down together. I grabbed the pry bar off the ground and swung it in a straight arc. The bar connected with a forearm. The masked person exhaled in a short burst and went still. I didn't wait to see if he would get back up. We left the flat while the fire climbed the brush. It was controlled enough not to ladder into the crowns, and for once the damp air worked in our favor. The masked people did not follow us into the thicker stand. They focused on the lids and the flames, and I understood too late that we were choosing which lives to save by leaving the fire where it was. We moved downslope toward the river and found the trail in a cut between Salal and Swordfern. It felt like stepping onto a road after being lost in a field. We kept moving. Luis was gone. I don't know when he broke away. I only know I didn't see him again. We reached Highway 6 after sunrise near the pullout for the Tillamook Forest Center. A couple in a Subaru saw the blood on Matt's shirt and stopped without asking questions. They called 911. The deputy listened to our story and looked at the burns on the back of my hands and wrote our names down. He asked how much we'd had to drink. He asked if we knew our attacker. He asked if we were sure about the location. A forest officer came and talked to the deputy in parking lot voices. An ambulance took Matt and Dana and Mara to the hospital in Tillamook. My hands shook so hard I couldn't sign the initial statement without resting the clipboard on the hood. 2 detectives met us later that day. A search team went out. They found old digs at a spur off the trail and evidence of recent soil disturbance, but no usable prints. Rain moved in that afternoon and flattened the scene. The burns were visible but contained. The deputies talked about transient camps and illegal dumps, and I understand liability enough to know you cannot write organized burial ground in a report without a career change. They asked if we could have misheard the whistles. I told them I have heard enough wildlife in this forest to know the difference. They nodded like people who have to nod when they don't have a box for what you are saying. Mara gave a statement through tears and pauses. She remembered being picked up near a highway turnout 2 nights before. She remembered a smell like cold dirt and fuel. She remembered the way her own breathing sounded under a board. The hospital kept her overnight. Dana had a concussion and bruised ribs. Matt had a fracture in his forearm and deep contusions along his back. Cole had stitches along his scalp. I had burns across both palms that made every daily task a negotiation for a week. Luis's family filed a missing person report 2 days later. The deputy called me once to say there were no updates. I went back to my mother's house in Salem and sat with Nora's jacket on my lap. The patch on the sleeve had the same blue thread I saw on the mask. I don't know if it means what I think it means. I only know that fabric doesn't travel by itself. Someone carried that cloth from a closet to the woods, or peeled it off her after she was gone. I kept wondering why our food was slashed while the bananas and apples were left. The high-calorie bars taken, the clean things left to rot. Systems reveal themselves in what they ignore. A week later, I drove back to the Wilson River and parked at the same day-use lot where we started. I did not step into the trees. I stood on the shoulder of the highway with the engine off and listened. Cars passed every few minutes, and then the sound settled back into the quiet you learn to trust out there. I could smell the river and damp duff and a faint trace of smoke that was probably someone's breakfast fire. I didn't hear whistles. I didn't hear coyotes. I did hear, faint and persistent, a scratch under the roots beside the first switchback down from the lot. It wasn't wind. It was not an animal I could name. It was a human pattern against a surface. I used to think the worst thing was not knowing. I have changed my mind. The worst thing is understanding the pattern and realizing it has been there longer than your search and will be there after you stop. This is the ending I can live with. We got Mara out. Dana and Matt healed. Cole checks in on me even when I don't reply. I filed everything I could with people who have to write things down. I have stopped telling myself I'm going to find Nora alive. That is not giving up. It is choosing to count the lives we can still move from under boards to open air. If you hike the Wilson River Trail and you see tidy lines where the ground shouldn't be tidy, or you find rope loops where there is no reason for rope, or you smell fuel where there is no lantern, leave. If you hear a single whistle, and then another, and then a third from a new direction, do not wait to see who is comfortable enough to stand in the open. Get to the highway. Call it in anyway. The forest keeps good records, but we have to add to them. I won't go back down to the flat. I don't need to. I know exactly where it is. I know what it cost to walk away, and I know what it gave me back, which is the right to stop walking in circles and let my sister be part of this place's history instead of my unfinished map.